I was standing at my kitchen window with my morning coffee when I saw the woman in the pristine white SUV pull into my driveway, and I knew immediately that my peaceful life in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, was about to get complicated. She stepped out wearing a powder blue cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly heating bill. Her blonde hair pulled back so tight I wondered if it gave her a headache. She clutched a leather folder against her chest like it was some kind of holy scripture, and her heels clicked on my concrete driveway with the rhythm of a ticking time bomb. I watched her march up to my front door and ring the bell 3 times in rapid succession, which should have been my first warning sign about what kind of person I was dealing with. I opened the door and forced a smile. "Can I help you? Are you Adam Harrison?" Her voice had that particular quality of someone who was used to getting exactly what they wanted, when they wanted it. "That's me. I'm Patricia Morrison, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association." She didn't offer her hand for a shake. "We need to discuss the unauthorized structure you've erected on your property." I blinked at her. "I'm sorry, what structure?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "The shed, the wooden building, whatever you want to call that eyesore at the corner of your lot." "Oh, you mean the warming hut." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "That's not a shed. It's a shelter for the kids waiting for the school bus. Gets pretty cold out here in January, and there's nowhere for them to get out of the wind." Patricia's expression didn't soften even a fraction. "I don't care what you call it or what purpose you think it serves. According to Section 7, subsection C of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA covenant, any structure over 6 feet in height or 8 feet in width requires written approval from the Architectural Review Committee before construction begins. Did you submit plans for approval?" I felt my jaw tighten. "No, I didn't think I needed to. It's just a simple shelter. 3 walls and a roof. I built it to help the neighborhood kids." "Intention is irrelevant, Mr. Harrison. You violated the covenant you signed when you purchased your home. The structure must be removed within 14 days, or we'll be forced to take legal action." She pulled a folded document from her leather folder and thrust it toward me. "This is your official notice of violation." I took the paper, scanning the dense text filled with legal terminology and references to various sections of documents I'd barely glanced at when I bought the house 2 years ago. "Look, Patricia, I understand rules are important, but this hut is actually helping people. There are 6 kids from this neighborhood who wait at that bus stop every morning. Before I built it, they were standing out in the snow and wind for 20 minutes. Now they have somewhere warm to wait. Then perhaps their parents should drive them to school." Patricia turned on her heel and started walking back toward her SUV. 14 days, Mr. Harrison. After that, we fine you $200 per day until the structure is removed." I stood on my porch, holding the violation notice as she backed out of my driveway and disappeared down the street. The warming hut sat at the corner of my property, right at the intersection of Maple Avenue and Oak Street. It was a simple structure, maybe 10 feet by 8 feet, with 3 walls and a slanted roof. I'd built it back in November after watching the neighborhood kids huddle together against the bitter Iowa wind, their breath making little clouds in the freezing air. The bus came at 7:15 every morning, and most of those kids were out there by 6:55 at the latest. I'd spent 3 weekends building it, using leftover lumber from my garage renovation and some shingles I got on sale at the hardware store. Inside, I'd put in a simple wooden bench along the back wall and hung a couple of hooks for backpacks. Nothing fancy, nothing that should have caused problems. I'd even painted it a nice forest green so it would blend in with the trees along the property line. That afternoon, I was in my garage working on my truck when my neighbor Frank walked over. Frank Miller was about 65, retired from the John Deere plant, and had lived in Meadowbrook Hills since the development was built 15 years ago. "Heard you got a visit from Patricia this morning," Frank said, leaning against my workbench. I wiped the grease off my hands with a rag. "News travels fast around here. She called an emergency board meeting for tonight. My wife's on the board, so I heard all about it." Frank shook his head. "Patricia's been on a rampage lately. Last month she went after the Hendersons because their Christmas lights weren't white. Month before that, she tried to find the Yamadas because their maple tree was dropping leaves in October. She's really going to fine me $200 a day over a bus shelter. Oh, she'll do it. And she'll take you to court if you don't pay. Patricia doesn't make empty threats." Frank pulled a pack of gum from his pocket and offered me a piece. "The thing is, she's not entirely wrong about the rules. You're supposed to get approval for structures, but the way she enforces things, it's like she's looking for violations, like she enjoys catching people. So what do I do? You could take it down. That's the easy way." Frank looked out toward the street where the warming hut stood. "But between you and me, I think that shelter's the best thing anyone's done in this neighborhood in years. My grandson uses it every morning, says it's the only reason his fingers don't freeze before school. I'm not taking it down." The words came out before I'd really thought about them, but once I said them, I knew they were true. "Those kids need it. Winter's only half over." Frank smiled. "Then you better get ready for a fight. Patricia doesn't lose gracefully." The next morning, I made it a point to be outside at 6:55. I wanted to see the kids using the warming hut, to remind myself why I'd built it in the first place. The sun wasn't even up yet, and the thermometer on my porch read 18 degrees. A bitter wind whipped down the street, making the cold feel even worse. The first kid to arrive was Tommy Chen, a sixth grader who lived 3 houses down. He was bundled up in a puffy winter coat, his backpack nearly as big as he was. He waved at me and headed straight for the warming hut, disappearing inside. Over the next 10 minutes, 5 more kids showed up. There were the Rodriguez twins, Maria and Sophia, who were in 4th grade. Then Jake Peterson, a tall 8th grader with braces. Sarah Mitchell, a quiet 7th grader who always had her nose in a book. And finally, little Emma Carlson, a 3rd grader whose mom worked the early shift at the hospital and couldn't wait with her. I walked over to the warming hut, pretending to check on the structure. Inside, the kids were chatting and laughing, their backpacks hung on the hooks, their bodies pressed together on the bench to share warmth. Through the open front, I could see them, but they were completely protected from the wind. "Hey, Mr. Harrison," Tommy said. "Thanks again for building this." "It's awesome." "Yeah," Emma added, her voice small but enthusiastic. "My mom says you're a hero." I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. Just being a good neighbor, kids, stay warm. The yellow school bus rumbled up right at 7:15, and the kids grabbed their backpacks and filed out, rushing toward the bus door. Within 30 seconds, they were all aboard and the bus was pulling away, leaving the warming hut empty again for another day. I was heading back toward my house when a car pulled up next to me. It was Jennifer Mitchell, Sarah's mom. She rolled down her window and I could see genuine concern on her face. "Adam, I heard Patricia gave you a violation notice about the shelter. Word really did travel fast." "Yeah, she wants it gone in 2 weeks. That's ridiculous. Do you know how much that shelter has helped? Sarah has asthma, and standing in the cold wind used to trigger her breathing problems almost every morning. Since you built that hut, she hasn't had a single incident." Jennifer's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Is there anything we can do to help? I'm not sure yet, but I'm not taking it down." "Good." Jennifer's expression was fierce. "Let me know if you need anything. Seriously. Some of us parents have been talking, and we're ready to back you up on this. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, reading through the entire HOA covenant document for the first time since I'd bought the house. It was dense, boring, and filled with the kind of legal language that made my eyes glaze over. But I forced myself to read every word of every section. Patricia was right about Section 7, subsection C. Any structure over the specified dimensions did require architectural committee approval. But as I kept reading, I found some interesting details. Section 7, subsection G talked about structures that provide community benefit and safety. It said that such structures could be granted expedited approval, and in some cases, could be approved retroactively if they served a compelling neighborhood need. I also found Section 12, which detailed the appeal process. If I disagreed with a violation notice, I could request a hearing before the full board within 30 days. The board had to schedule the hearing within 2 weeks of the request, and I'd have the opportunity to present my case. I drafted a formal appeal letter that night, citing Section 7, subsection G, and requesting a hearing. I argued that the warming hut provided a clear community benefit and addressed a safety concern for neighborhood children. I printed out 3 copies, put them in envelopes, and drove to the addresses listed on the HOA website for Patricia Morrison, Board Secretary Leonard Walsh, and Treasurer Deanne Foster. I dropped the letters in their mailboxes that night, and by the next morning my phone was ringing. "This is Adam. Mr. Harrison, this is Patricia Morrison." Her voice was even colder than it had been in person. "I received your appeal letter. Good. So when's the hearing?" "The board will meet next Tuesday evening at 7. But I should tell you that your appeal is highly unlikely to succeed. The Architectural Committee exists for a reason, and we cannot simply ignore violations because someone claims good intentions. I'll see you Tuesday then." I hung up before she could respond. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I contacted all the parents whose kids used the warming hut, and several of them agreed to come to the hearing to speak on my behalf. I took photos of the structure from multiple angles, showing how simple and well maintained it was. I researched Iowa law regarding HOAs and property rights, filling a notebook with information and precedents. Frank's wife Carol, who was on the board, called me on Monday evening. "Adam, I wanted to give you a heads up about tomorrow night. Patricia's been calling board members all week, making her case about why the structure needs to come down. She's really dug in on this." "What about the other board members? Where do they stand?" "Leonard tends to go along with whatever Patricia wants. He's not a bad guy, just doesn't like conflict. Deanne's more independent-minded, but she's also a stickler for rules. And then there's Marcus Webb. He's the newest board member. He's got kids in the high school, so he might be sympathetic, but I don't know for sure." Carol paused. "I'm going to vote in your favor. That shelter's helped a lot of kids, but I'm not sure it'll be enough. Thanks for the support, Carol, and thanks for the information." Tuesday evening arrived with fresh snow falling across Cedar Rapids. I dressed in my best button-down shirt and khakis, gathered all my documentation into a folder, and drove to the Meadowbrook Hills Community Center. The building was a small brick structure at the entrance to the neighborhood, used for board meetings and the occasional neighborhood party. When I arrived, the parking lot was already half full. I recognized several cars belonging to parents from the bus stop. Inside, the meeting room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of folding chairs facing them. At least 20 people were already seated, far more than usually attended HOA meetings, according to Frank. Patricia sat at the center of the board table, looking completely composed and professional in a Navy business suit. To her right was Leonard Walsh, a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses. To her left was Deanne Foster, a sturdy woman in her 40s with short gray hair. Marcus Webb, a tall black man in his late 30s, sat at the far end, and Carol Miller was on the other end, offering me an encouraging nod when I walked in. I took a seat in the front row, and Jennifer Mitchell leaned forward from the row behind me. "We're all here for you, Adam. Don't let her intimidate you." At 7 o'clock sharp, Patricia called the meeting to order. She went through the standard opening procedures, approval of previous meeting minutes, and a financial report. I tried to pay attention, but my mind was racing with everything I wanted to say. Finally, Patricia said, "We now come to the appeal hearing for violation notice 24-003, issued to Mr. Adam Harrison of 482 Maple Avenue. Mr. Harrison, you have 15 minutes to present your case." I stood and walked to the front of the room, turning to face the audience and the board. My hands were shaking slightly, so I gripped my folder tightly. "Thank you for hearing my appeal. On November 12th of last year, I built a warming hut at the corner of my property, at the intersection of Maple Avenue and Oak Street. This location is where 6 children from our neighborhood wait for the school bus every morning. Before I built the shelter, these kids stood in the open for 20 minutes or more, exposed to wind, snow, and freezing temperatures. We're talking about kids as young as 8 years old, standing in weather that regularly drops below 20 degrees. I opened my folder and pulled out the photos I'd taken. This is the structure in question. It's simple, well built and maintained. 3 walls, a roof, and a bench inside. It's painted to match the natural surroundings. It doesn't block sight lines for traffic. It doesn't create any safety hazards. What it does do is protect children from dangerous weather conditions. Patricia raised her hand. "Mr. Harrison, none of that changes the fact that you built a structure without obtaining proper approval. You violated a covenant that you agreed to follow when you purchased your home." "I understand that, and that's why I'm here appealing based on Section 7, subsection G, which allows for structures that provide community benefit and safety." I pulled out my copy of the covenant, marked with sticky notes. This subsection specifically mentions that such structures can be approved retroactively if they serve a compelling need. I would argue that protecting children from dangerous weather is exactly the kind of compelling need this subsection addresses. Leonard Walsh spoke up, his voice quiet. "But Mr. Harrison, if we allow one person to build without approval and then seek retroactive permission, what's to stop everyone from doing the same thing? The approval process exists to maintain order and consistency in the neighborhood." I understand that concern, and I'm not suggesting the approval process should be eliminated. What I am saying is that this is a unique situation. This isn't a deck or a fence or a decorative structure. This is a shelter that's actively being used by multiple families in our neighborhood to keep their children safe. I gestured toward the audience. "Several of those parents are here tonight and would like to speak if you'll allow it." Patricia looked like she wanted to refuse, but Marcus Webb spoke up. "I think we should hear from the community members. That's what this hearing is supposed to be about, right?" Patricia's jaw tightened, but she nodded. 5 minutes total for public comment. Jennifer Mitchell stood first. "My daughter Sarah has asthma. Before Mr. Harrison built that shelter, she was having breathing problems almost every morning from standing in the cold. Since November, she hasn't had a single incident. That shelter has made a direct, measurable improvement in my daughter's health." Carlos Rodriguez went next. "My twins are in 4th grade. We both work early shifts, so we can't wait with them at the bus stop. Knowing they have a warm place to wait gives us peace of mind. Mr. Harrison didn't have to do this. He did it because he saw a need and took action. That's exactly the kind of neighbor we should want in this community. 3 more parents spoke, each describing how the warming hut had helped their children. By the time they finished, even Leonard Walsh looked a bit uncomfortable with the idea of forcing its removal. Patricia cleared her throat. While I appreciate everyone's personal experiences, we have to think about precedent and procedure. The Architectural Review Committee exists for a reason. If we simply waive the rules whenever someone builds something popular, we undermine the entire system that keeps this neighborhood attractive and maintains our property values. Property values. The words came from Emma Carlson's mother, Bethany, who stood up in the back row. You're worried about property values when we're talking about keeping children safe. My daughter is 8 years old. She weighs 55 pounds. When it's 15 degrees outside with a 20-mile-per-hour wind, she can't keep herself warm just standing on a street corner. That shelter has been a godsend for our family. Patricia's face flushed red. I'm not minimizing the welfare of children, Mrs. Carlson. I'm simply saying there's a proper way to do things and Mr. Harrison didn't follow that process. Then let's fix it now, Marcus Webb said. He looked at me. Mr. Harrison, if the board were to require you to submit formal plans for approval right now, would you do that? Absolutely. I should have done it from the beginning and I apologize for that oversight, but the structure is already built and being used. It seems like tearing it down only to potentially approve identical plans later doesn't make sense for anyone. Diane Foster had been quiet through most of the discussion, but now she spoke. I've reviewed Section 7, subsection G, and I think Mr. Harrison has a legitimate argument. The language about retroactive approval is specifically designed for situations like this. However, I do think we need to conduct a proper review of the structure to ensure it meets safety standards. I'd welcome that, I said. You can inspect it whenever you want. Patricia looked around the table at her fellow board members, and I could see she realized she was losing control of the situation. I move that we table this discussion for 2 weeks to allow the Architectural Committee to conduct a thorough review of the structure and prepare a formal recommendation. I second that motion, Leonard said quickly. Carol Miller raised her hand. I'd like to amend the motion to specify that the structure remains in place during the review period, and that the 14-day removal deadline is suspended pending the committee's recommendation. Seconded, Marcus said immediately. Patricia looked furious, but she couldn't stop the vote. All in favor of the amended motion. 4 hands went up: Carol, Marcus, Deanne, and Leonard. Only Patricia voted against it. The motion carries, Patricia said through gritted teeth. The Architectural Committee will conduct its review and present findings at the next board meeting in 2 weeks. This hearing is adjourned. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It wasn't a complete victory, but it bought me time and showed that the board wasn't united against me. As people filed out of the community center, several parents stopped to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to Patricia. Frank caught me in the parking lot. That went better than I expected. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. She's not going to let this go, is she? Not a chance. But you've got support now, and that matters. Frank clapped me on the shoulder. Watch your back, though. Patricia's vindictive when she doesn't get her way. I didn't fully understand what Frank meant until 2 days later when I got a call from the city building inspector's office. Mr. Harrison, this is Robert Chen from the Cedar Rapids Building Department. I received a complaint about an unpermitted structure on your property. I need to come by and conduct an inspection. My stomach dropped. Of course. When would you like to come? How about tomorrow morning around 10? That evening I called my buddy Mike who worked in construction. Hey, I need some advice. The city building inspector's coming to look at the warming hut tomorrow. What do I need to know? Did you pull permits when you built it? No, I didn't think I needed to for something that simple. Mike was quiet for a moment. Okay, here's the thing. In Cedar Rapids, structures under 120 square feet typically don't require a building permit as long as they're not permanent foundations and don't have electrical or plumbing. Your hut's what, 80 square feet? About that, yeah. And it's just sitting on gravel, no foundation. No electricity, no plumbing, just wood and shingles. Then you should be fine. The inspector might give you some recommendations, but you shouldn't be in violation of any codes. Mike paused. Someone reported you. I'm pretty sure it was the HOA president. Sounds like she's trying to find any angle to force you to take it down. But if you're within code, there's nothing the city can make you do. Robert Chen arrived the next morning in a city truck, carrying a clipboard and a measuring tape. He was maybe 30, professional but friendly. I walked him over to the warming hut and explained its purpose. I appreciate what you're doing for the kids, Robert said as he examined the structure. Let me just take some measurements and make sure everything's safe. I watched as he measured the dimensions, checked the roof attachment, and tested the stability of the walls. He took photos and made notes on his clipboard. The whole inspection took about 20 minutes. Okay, Mr. Harrison, here's the situation. The structure is under 120 square feet, so no building permit was required. The construction is solid and doesn't pose any safety hazards. You're not in violation of any city codes. Robert tore off a pink copy of his inspection form and handed it to me. I'll send a report back to whoever filed the complaint, but as far as the city's concerned, you're good to go. I felt relief wash over me. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. No problem. And between you and me, I wish more people looked out for kids in their neighborhood like this. Robert headed back to his truck, and I stood there holding the inspection form like it was a winning lottery ticket. I made copies of the inspection report and sent them to all 5 board members, along with a polite letter explaining that the structure met all applicable city codes. I didn't mention Patricia by name, but I figured everyone would know who had called the city inspector. The next 2 weeks crawled by. I kept watching the kids use the warming hut every morning, and the temperatures seemed to get colder every day. We had 3 days where the temperature didn't get above 0, and I couldn't imagine those kids standing outside in that weather. The evening of the next board meeting arrived with brutal wind chills. I showed up early, and once again the room was packed with parents. But this time there were also some new faces, people I didn't recognize from the first meeting. Patricia called the meeting to order, and I noticed she seemed more confident than she'd been 2 weeks ago. That made me nervous. Tonight we'll hear the Architectural Committee's report regarding the structure at 482 Maple Avenue, Patricia began. I conducted a thorough review of the structure, and I've prepared a detailed analysis. She pulled out a bound document that looked like it was 20 pages long. While the structure does not violate city building codes, I found multiple violations of HOA covenant standards. First, the color green used to paint the structure does not match any of the approved exterior colors listed in our architectural guidelines. Second, the roofline does not match the aesthetic character of surrounding homes. Third, the structure is visible from the street, which creates visual clutter in our neighborhood. Fourth, while the structure itself may be under 120 square feet, the gravel pad beneath it expands the total area of property modification beyond the threshold requiring approval. I felt my temper rising. She was grasping at straws, finding technicalities that had nothing to do with the actual purpose or function of the warming hut. Based on these findings, Patricia continued, I recommend the board uphold the original violation notice and require removal of the structure within 14 days. However, I am prepared to be reasonable. Mr. Harrison may submit new plans for a structure that complies with all architectural guidelines, and the committee will review those plans in the standard timeframe of 60 to 90 days. 60 to 90 days. I stood up without thinking. Winter will be over by then. Those kids need shelter now, not in 3 months. Mr. Harrison, you're out of order, Patricia said sharply. Actually, he has a right to speak during his own case, Marcus Webb interjected. Let him respond to your report. I took a breath, trying to calm down. First, I'm happy to repaint the structure any color the board approves. That can be done in a single afternoon. Second, the roofline is functional, designed to shed snow and rain. It's not meant to be decorative. Third, the structure is visible from the street because it needs to be at the bus stop, which is by definition on a street. And fourth, the gravel pad is simply ground preparation to prevent the structure from sitting in mud. By that logic, every house in this neighborhood requires architectural approval because we all have landscaping around our foundations. You're twisting the guidelines to suit your purposes, Patricia shot back. No, you're twisting them to create violations where none exist. I held up the city inspection report. The city inspector found no problems. The structure is safe, functional, and serving a genuine community need. The only problem here is that you don't like the fact that I built something without asking your permission first. Patricia's face went red. This isn't personal, Mr. Harrison. This is about maintaining standards. Really, because it feels pretty personal. I looked at the other board members. I built a simple shelter to help kids in our neighborhood. Every objection that's been raised is either easily fixable or completely arbitrary. Meanwhile, we're in the middle of one of the coldest winters Iowa's seen in years, and you want to force kids to stand outside in dangerous conditions because you don't like the color I painted some wood. Bethany Carlson stood up. I've been a resident of Meadowbrook Hills for 8 years. I've paid my HOA dues on time. I've followed every rule. And I'm telling you right now, if you force Mr. Harrison to tear down that shelter, I'm going to make it my personal mission to recall every single board member who votes for removal. Starting with you, Patricia. Several other parents voiced their agreement. Patricia looked stunned at the hostility in the room. Diane Foster held up her hand. I think we need to take a breath here. I've reviewed Patricia's report, and frankly, most of these objections are minor and fixable. Mr. Harrison, if you agree to repaint the structure in an approved color and submit documentation of the structure's specifications for our records, would that address your concerns about delay? Yes, absolutely. I can have it repainted this weekend. Then I move that we approve the structure contingent on those 2 conditions, and that we update our architectural guidelines to include a fast-track approval process for community safety structures in the future. I second that, Carol Miller said immediately. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. This is highly irregular. We're setting a dangerous precedent. No, we're showing common sense, Marcus Webb said. I've got 3 kids and I know how brutal bus stops can be in winter. This structure is helping families and the objections are trivial. Let's vote. The vote was 4-1 with only Patricia voting against approval. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. As the meeting adjourned, Patricia gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements. She didn't look at anyone as she left the community center, and I noticed several people actively avoiding her. I thought that was the end of it. I repainted the warming hut a nice beige color that weekend, submitted the required documentation, and figured I could finally put the whole mess behind me. But I severely underestimated Patricia Morrison's commitment to making my life difficult. 2 weeks after the board meeting, I got a letter from a law firm in downtown Cedar Rapids. The letter informed me that the HOA was suing me for attorney's fees related to the violation notice and appeal process. According to the letter, the HOA had incurred over $4,000 in legal expenses because of my flagrant disregard for community standards, and the covenant allowed them to recover those costs from homeowners who violated the rules. I called Carol Miller immediately. "Did you know Patricia was planning to sue me?" "What? No, the board didn't vote on that." Carol sounded genuinely shocked. "Let me make some calls." 20 minutes later, she called back. "I talked to Leonard and Deanne. Neither of them knew anything about this lawsuit. Patricia hired a lawyer on her own and is claiming she has authority as board president to pursue legal action without a vote. But she doesn't. She's way out of line. So what do I do? Come to the emergency board meeting I just called for tomorrow night, and you might want to bring a lawyer." I didn't have a lawyer, but I knew someone who did. My buddy Dave's wife was an attorney who did some HOA work. I called her that evening and explained the situation. "Patricia Morrison sounds like she's gone rogue," attorney Rebecca Walsh said. "The board president can't unilaterally decide to sue a homeowner. That requires a board vote. And honestly, even if they voted to sue, this case would be thrown out. You won your appeal, the structure was approved, and you fixed the minor issues they identified. There's no basis for recovering legal fees. Can you come to the meeting tomorrow night? I'll be there. This should be interesting." The emergency board meeting was even more packed than the previous ones. Word had spread about Patricia's lawsuit and people were angry. I saw at least 30 residents in attendance, many of whom I'd never met before. Patricia looked defensive when she called the meeting to order. "I understand there's some confusion about the legal action I initiated on behalf of the HOA." "There's no confusion," Deanne Foster interrupted. "You overstepped your authority. The board president cannot file lawsuits without board approval. That's explicitly stated in our bylaws." "I was acting in the best interests of the association," Patricia insisted. "Mr. Harrison's violations created legal expenses that the HOA shouldn't have to absorb." "What violations?" Marcus Webb held up the meeting minutes from 2 weeks ago. "The board approved his structure. The case is closed. You're pursuing a personal vendetta at association expense." "That's not true. I'm protecting property values and enforcing our covenants." Rebecca Walsh stood up. "Excuse me, my name is Rebecca Walsh and I'm representing Mr. Harrison. May I address the board?" Patricia looked like she wanted to refuse, but Carol quickly said, "Please go ahead." "Thank you. I've reviewed the lawsuit that was filed in Mrs. Morrison's name as HOA president. The legal claims have no merit. The structure in question was approved by this board, all minor issues were resolved, and the city found no code violations. Furthermore, Mrs. Morrison filed this lawsuit without board authorization, which means she's potentially exposed the HOA to liability for malicious prosecution. I strongly recommend that the board immediately vote to withdraw the lawsuit and publicly distance the association from Mrs. Morrison's actions." "This is outrageous," Patricia sputtered. "I'm trying to protect this community." "No, you're trying to punish someone who disagreed with you," Bethany Carlson called out from the audience. "And we're all sick of it. How many people have you gone after over the years for petty rule violations? How many neighbors have you harassed with threatening letters and fines?" Several other people shouted in agreement. The meeting was dissolving into chaos, and Patricia looked panicked. Leonard Walsh, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke up. "I move that the board immediately withdraw the lawsuit against Mr. Harrison and direct the association's attorney to formally notify the court that Mrs. Morrison was acting outside her authority." "Seconded," Deanne said. The vote was 4-0 with Patricia abstaining. She looked furious. "I further move," Carol Miller said, "that we open a discussion about whether Mrs. Morrison should continue as board president given her repeated overreach of authority." "I second that motion," Marcus said. Now Patricia stood up, her face white with anger. "You ungrateful people have no idea how much work I've done for this neighborhood. I've spent countless hours maintaining standards, enforcing rules, and protecting your investments. And this is how you repay me: by siding with someone who flaunted our covenants." "Patricia, sit down," Deanne said firmly. "We're going to vote on whether to remove you as president. You can't do that. I'll sue all of you." "Actually, we can, and that threat is exactly why we should." Deanne looked at the other board members. All in favor, 4 hands went up. Only Patricia's stayed down. The motion carries. Patricia Morrison is removed as HOA board president. Per our bylaws, the vice president assumes the role until the next election. Deanne turned to Carol. "Congratulations, Carol. You're now the board president." Patricia grabbed her leather folder and stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her. The room erupted in applause. Carol called for order. "Okay, everyone, let's settle down. We have some damage control to do. First, I want to apologize to Mr. Harrison on behalf of the board. This situation was handled poorly from the start, and you were treated unfairly." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that. Second, I'm going to propose that we completely revamp our architectural review process to make it more reasonable and responsive to community needs. Anyone interested in serving on a committee to work on that, please see me after the meeting." The meeting wrapped up shortly after, and I walked out feeling like the nightmare was finally over. Rebecca Walsh caught me in the parking lot. "That went well," she said. "I'll send a formal response to the lawsuit, but I doubt we'll hear anything else about it. Patricia doesn't have a leg to stand on. Thanks for coming tonight. I really appreciate it." "No problem. And hey, what you did building that shelter, that's good stuff. Don't let bureaucratic nonsense make you regret helping people." I drove home feeling better than I had in weeks. The warming hut was safe, the kids had their shelter, and Patricia Morrison was no longer in a position to make my life miserable. But the universe wasn't quite done with surprises. 3 days later, I was at work at the manufacturing plant where I supervised the welding department when I got a call from Jennifer Mitchell. "Adam, you need to come home right now. Something's happened to the warming hut." "What do you mean? What happened?" "Just come home, please." I told my manager I had an emergency and drove home as fast as I safely could. When I turned onto my street, I saw several cars parked near my house and people standing around the corner of my property. As I got closer, my heart sank. The warming hut was destroyed. The walls had been knocked down, the roof was caved in, and the whole structure looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. Jennifer, Frank, and several other neighbors stood around the wreckage looking shocked. What the hell happened? I walked around the damaged structure trying to make sense of it. "We don't know," Frank said. "I was out for my morning walk around 7 and everything was fine. By 8:30, Sarah Mitchell came running to Jennifer's house saying the shelter was destroyed. That was about 20 minutes ago." "Did anyone see anything?" People shook their heads. I noticed something and bent down to pick it up. It was a piece of paper, partially crumpled and dirty. I unfolded it and read the handwritten message. "This is what happens when you don't follow the rules. Call the police," I said quietly. "This is vandalism." Jennifer already had her phone out. Within 15 minutes, a Cedar Rapids police officer named Officer Daniels arrived to take a report. He examined the damage, took photos, and collected the threatening note as evidence. "You have any idea who might have done this?" Officer Daniels asked. I hesitated. I had a pretty strong suspicion, but I didn't want to accuse someone without proof. There's been some conflict with the HOA about this structure. The former board president was pretty angry when the board voted to keep it. Former president? Patricia Morrison. She was removed from her position a few days ago at a board meeting. She wasn't happy about it. Officer Daniels made notes. "I'll need to speak with her. You have her address." I provided Patricia's information, along with the names of other board members who could corroborate the timeline of events. The officer said he'd investigate and be in touch. After Officer Daniels left, I stood looking at the destroyed warming hut, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. I'd spent 3 weekends building it. Kids had relied on it every morning, and now someone had deliberately destroyed it, probably in the middle of the night like a coward. "We'll help you rebuild it," Carlos Rodriguez said. Several other neighbors nodded in agreement. "I appreciate that, but I'm not sure I should. What if whoever did this comes back? Then we'll install a camera," Frank said. "I've got one in my garage you can borrow. We're not letting some vindictive person drive you out or stop you from helping the neighborhood." That weekend, nearly a dozen neighbors showed up at my house with tools and materials. Frank brought his camera. Carlos brought extra lumber. Jennifer brought sandwiches and coffee. Even some people I'd barely spoken to came to help. We rebuilt the warming hut in a single day, and this time we made it even better. It was sturdier, with reinforced walls and a more secure roof. Frank helped me install the security camera, positioning it to capture the entire structure and the surrounding area. We mounted it high enough that someone would need a ladder to tamper with it. The next morning, the kids were thrilled to have their shelter back. Emma Carlson brought me a hand-drawn thank you card with crayon pictures of all the kids standing in the warming hut. It made all the hassle worthwhile. 2 days later, Officer Daniels called me. "Mr. Harrison, I need you to come down to the station to review some information we've gathered." At the police station, Officer Daniels led me to a small conference room and opened a laptop. "We executed a search warrant on Patricia Morrison's residence this morning. We found several items of interest." He showed me photos on the screen. There was a sledgehammer with fresh wood particles on it, a pair of work boots with sawdust on the soles, and most damning, a notebook where Patricia had written detailed plans about teaching Harrison a lesson and making sure that eyesore never comes back. She actually wrote that down. "People do stupid things when they are angry. We arrested Mrs. Morrison this morning and charged her with criminal mischief and vandalism. She's being processed now." Officer Daniels closed the laptop. "I wanted you to know because she'll likely make bail this afternoon, and I thought you should be aware she might be back in the neighborhood. Thanks for the heads up, and thank you for taking this seriously. Property crime is still crime, Mr. Harrison, and the threatening note elevated this beyond simple vandalism. She'll be facing some significant consequences." I left the police station feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I hadn't wanted Patricia to be arrested, but she'd brought it on herself. She could have just accepted the board's decision and moved on, but instead she'd chosen to escalate to criminal behavior. That evening, Carol Miller called. "I heard about Patricia's arrest. The board is meeting tomorrow night to discuss next steps. We want to make sure you're supported and that this doesn't happen again." At the emergency board meeting, the room was quieter than previous gatherings. The drama had moved beyond HOA politics into actual criminal activity, and people seemed sobered by that reality. The board has voted to permanently ban Patricia Morrison from serving in any HOA leadership position, Carol announced. We're also implementing new oversight procedures to prevent any single board member from acting unilaterally. And we're updating our architectural guidelines to specifically allow community safety structures like warming huts with expedited approval. Deanne Foster added, "We're also establishing a community improvement fund. Several neighbors have suggested we expand the warming hut concept to other bus stops in the neighborhood. Mr. Harrison, would you be willing to help with that?" I was surprised but pleased. "Yeah, I'd be happy to." Over the next month, I helped build 2 more warming huts at other bus stops in Meadowbrook Hills. Neighbors volunteered time and materials, and the board provided some funding from the Community Improvement Fund. Each structure had a small plaque that read, "Meadowbrook Community Warming Shelter," with the year. Patricia Morrison's criminal case moved through the court system. She pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and was sentenced to pay restitution for the damage, 1 year of probation, and 100 hours of community service. The judge also issued a restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of my property. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia and her husband put their house up for sale. They moved out in March, right as winter was finally loosening its grip on Iowa. I never spoke to her again after that disastrous board meeting. The warming huts became a point of pride in the neighborhood. Local news did a story about them, highlighting how community members had come together to help protect kids waiting for school buses. The segment went semi-viral online, and I got emails from people in other states asking for advice on building similar structures in their neighborhoods. In April, as the weather finally warmed up and the kids stopped needing the warming huts daily, the neighborhood threw a community appreciation picnic. It was the best-attended neighborhood event in years, according to longtime residents. Kids played in the park, families grilled food, and people actually talked to each other instead of just waving politely from their driveways. Frank and I were manning the grill when he said, "You know, I've lived here 15 years, and this is the first time the neighborhood actually feels like a community. All because you cared enough to build a simple shelter." "I just didn't want to watch kids freeze," I said. "That's exactly my point. You saw a problem and fixed it instead of waiting for someone else to do something. That's rare." Carol came over with a framed certificate. "Adam, the board wanted to recognize you for your service to the community. This is a formal appreciation award, and we're also naming you as an honorary member of the Architectural Review Committee. If you want it, of course." I'd be honored. As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, life in Meadowbrook Hills settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new board was responsive and reasonable. Neighbors were more connected. And when winter came around again, the warming huts were ready and waiting. I still made it a point to be outside around 6:55 most mornings, watching the kids file into the shelter I'd built. Tommy Chen was in 7th grade now. The Rodriguez twins were in 5th. Emma Carlson was in 4th, taller and more confident than the shy 3rd grader I'd first noticed shivering at the bus stop. One particularly cold morning in December, I walked over to the warming hut to check on the kids. They were all inside, chatting and laughing like always. Sarah Mitchell was showing the younger kids something on her phone. Jake Peterson was helping Emma with her math homework. It was such a simple scene, but it represented everything I'd hoped the warming hut would provide. A safe, warm place where kids could just be kids. Tommy noticed me standing outside and waved. "Hey, Mr. Harrison, temperature's supposed to drop below 0 tomorrow. Think the hut will be warm enough? I added extra insulation in the walls last month," I called back. "You'll be fine." The yellow bus appeared at the end of the street, and the kids grabbed their backpacks. As they filed out toward the bus, Emma stopped and looked back at me. "Thanks for building this, Mr. Harrison, and for not taking it down when that mean lady told you to." "You're welcome, Emma. Stay warm." She ran to catch the bus, and I stood there watching until it disappeared around the corner. In the distance, I could see the other two warming huts at their respective bus stops, sheltering more kids from the brutal Iowa winter. Frank walked up beside me, his hands shoved in his coat pockets against the cold. "Patricia's house finally sold. New family moving in next week. Young couple with a baby. That's good. Fresh start for everyone. You ever regret building that thing? All the hassle it caused." I thought about it for a moment, watching my breath make clouds in the frozen air. I thought about the violation notices, the board meetings, the legal threats, the vandalism, and all the stress and conflict that had consumed months of my life. Then I thought about Emma's thank you card hanging on my refrigerator, about Jennifer Mitchell telling me that Sarah's asthma had improved, about Tommy and the other kids having a safe place to wait every morning. "Not for a second," I said. "Good answer." Frank smiled and headed back toward his house. "See you at the next board meeting. I hear we're discussing adding benches at the community center. I'll be there." I walked back to my own house, the warming hut standing solid and sturdy behind me. Through my kitchen window, I could see it from the perfect angle, a simple structure of wood and paint that had somehow become a symbol of what neighborhoods could be when people looked out for each other, instead of just following rules for rules' sake. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol Miller. The message read, "City Council wants to feature our warming huts in their community newsletter. They're calling it a model program for neighborhood safety. Thought you'd want to know." I smiled and texted back, "Happy to help however I can." As I poured my second cup of coffee that morning, I reflected on how a simple act of kindness had spiraled into months of conflict before ultimately bringing positive change. The warming hut had started as just a practical solution to a problem I noticed. I never imagined it would lead to HOA battles, criminal charges, and eventually a neighborhood transformation. But that's how change works sometimes. Someone has to be willing to do the right thing even when it's inconvenient, even when it causes conflict, even when people in positions of authority say no. The kids waiting for the bus didn't need permission to deserve warmth and shelter. They just needed someone to care enough to provide it. The warming hut still stands at the corner of my property, weather beaten but solid, doing its job every school day. 3 more have been built at other stops around Meadowbrook Hills, and I've heard 2 other neighborhoods in Cedar Rapids are planning similar projects. The security camera Frank installed is still there, though we've never had another incident of vandalism. Patricia Morrison moved to a different part of the city. I see her occasionally at the grocery store or gas station, and we pretend not to notice each other. Her chapter in Meadowbrook Hills is closed, a cautionary tale about what happens when rule enforcement becomes more important than community welfare. The new HOA board is practical and responsive. They approved a community garden last spring, organized a neighborhood watch program that actually focuses on helping people rather than citing violations, and established a winter safety committee that maintains the warming huts and checks on elderly residents during storms. Property values in Meadowbrook Hills have actually increased, despite Patricia's dire warnings about the consequences of allowing my unauthorized structure. Turns out people want to live in neighborhoods where residents care about each other and work together to solve problems. Who knew? My life has mostly returned to normal. I work my shifts at the plant, maintain my house, watch football on Sundays. But every school morning during winter, I still find myself glancing out the kitchen window at 6:55 to see those kids filing into the warming hut. And it reminds me why all the hassle was worth it. Emma Carlson's hand-drawn thank you card is still on my refrigerator, faded now but precious. Sometimes when I'm having a rough day, I look at those crayon drawings of smiling kids standing in a green shelter, and I remember that doing the right thing matters even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. The warming hut taught me something important about communities and how they function. Rules and covenants and procedures have their place, but they should serve people, not the other way around. When bureaucracy becomes an end unto itself, rather than a means to create better living conditions, something has gone fundamentally wrong. I'm grateful that enough of my neighbors understood that distinction and were willing to stand up for common sense over rigid rule enforcement. The packed board meetings, the parents speaking up, the volunteers who helped rebuild after the vandalism, those were the moments that showed what Meadowbrook Hills could be at its best. As I finish my coffee and get ready for another day at work, I can see fresh snow starting to fall outside. The forecast calls for temperatures in the teens tonight and single digits tomorrow morning. But those kids waiting for the bus will be okay. They'll have shelter from the wind and cold, a warm place to wait together, because someone decided their comfort and safety mattered more than asking permission from a committee. That simple wooden structure at the corner of Maple and Oak has become more than just a shelter from winter weather. It's a reminder that positive change often starts with one person seeing a need and taking action, that communities grow stronger when members look out for each other, and that standing up for what's right sometimes requires accepting conflict and controversy. The warming hut stands as proof that compassion and common sense can prevail over petty bureaucracy, that neighbors united can overcome vindictive opposition, and that sometimes the most meaningful contributions to a community are the simplest ones. A few walls, a roof, and a bench. Nothing complicated or expensive. Just adequate shelter from the cold, offered freely because kids deserve to be warm while waiting for their school bus. That's not revolutionary or profound. It's basic human decency. But in a world where HOA boards can turn basic decency into a federal case, sometimes you have to fight for the right to be kind. And that's exactly what happened in Meadowbrook Hills during that contentious winter. Now, as another winter settles over Cedar Rapids and those warming huts prepare for another season of service, I know I made the right choice. I'd do it all again, the violation notices, the board meetings, the legal threats, everything, because those kids needed help and I was in a position to provide it. That's what community means. That's what being a good neighbor looks like. And no HOA covenant, architectural review committee, or vindictive board president can change that fundamental truth. Sometimes, you just have to build the warming hut and deal with the consequences, because doing nothing isn't an option when you see people suffering and have the ability to help. The snow falls heavier now, coating my lawn and the street and the warming hut in fresh white powder. Tomorrow morning, those kids will trudge through the snow to their bus stop, and they'll have a warm place to wait. That's all that really matters in the end. Everything else, the drama and conflict and resolution, that's just the story of how we got here. The warming hut itself, solid and functional and serving its purpose, that's what endures.